When you want change, everything changes. But it takes selfishness to self-improve. I want us to reflect on that for a minute. When you want change, and I know this from personal experience, so to be able to say when you want change, everything changes, but it takes selfishness to self-improve. I hope that unlock some things wherever it need to and whoever it need to. And I say that because sometimes it takes for you to change for those that you know to see a need for a change. You don't listen, you're going to miss it. Some going to resonate with that, and some may not. But for those who do, thank you for being an example, including myself. Thank you for your example. You hear me? Thank you for putting yourself first. You hear me? Because until we won't change, we probably aware that things stand the same. And I say that because in a time where everybody's supposed to be woke or enlightened or whatever we may want to call it, it's also the time where most people who's supposed to be woke get lazy, get spiritually lazy, you know, and not in the awareness that after getting woke, you gotta do just as much as you was doing prior to getting woke that you gonna need to do after you get woke. You hear me? You don't listen, you gonna miss it. And I had to hear it as it comes, so I can't rewind it. But it's a fine line. I say all that to say it's a fine line. It's a fine line. And I live my life as my example, and I live my life as an example. Because I know what it takes to transform. I transform, and I'm still transforming. You hear me? I ain't perfected. Nor am I perfect at all. You hear me? I don't claim to be. But I ain't through with me yet. You hear me? I ain't through with me yet. Some of y'all gonna resonate with that. Some of y'all may not. You hear me? But for those that do, let me hear you say, I ain't through with me yet. You hear me? I ain't through with me yet. You know, only those who are not able to profess that for themselves still got some healing to do, and that's okay. I was there. I was there once before where I wouldn't have been able to, you know, say I'm you know what I'm saying right now, for sure, to make it short. You hear me? But it's a fine line. You hear me? It's a fine line between light and dark. It's a fine line between yin and yang. It's a fine line between masculine and feminine. It's a fine line between positive and negative. It's a fine line between on and off. It's a fine line between internal and external. It's a fine line between as above and so below. Because here we are, you hear me? It's a fine line between hot and cold. It's a fine line between within and without. Because here we are, you hear me? It's a fine line between the living and the dead. Even some alive. You don't listen, you're gonna miss it. It's a fine line between low vibration and high vibration. It's a fine line between individuality and separation. I pause so that could be reflected on, because somebody gonna think that those two words are the same, but they're not when you go, if you dig deep into those words. Individualization, individuality, and separation. It's a fine line between hurt and healing. It's a fine line between fact and falsehood. It's a fine line between the seen, the unseen, or the visible and invisible. And it's a fine line between hurt and healing. It's a fine line between spirituality and physicality. But it ain't no cup. It's a fine line between the conscious and the unconscious conscious. If you don't listen, you're gonna miss it. It's a fine line between the human being and the divine being. It's a fine line between rest and work. It's a fine line between love and hate. It's a fine line between foolishness, which I'm very aware of, and wisdom, which I'm very aware of. It's a fine line between cleanliness and filth. It's a fine line between truth and lies. It's a fine line between rushing and patience. Being still and know who you are, in other words, etc., etc. There's so many fine lines and contrast comparators that I could use. But to make a long story short, everything has a fine line, and the fine line is you. And the more we come to that conclusion, that the fine line is each and every one of us, and we have a choice in how we design and how we draw what our fine line is, the balance would be the peace, because the fine line is us. You hear me? I went through those things because it's my duty to do. It's my duty to discipline myself. It's an honor to share it. It's an honor to share the mental disciplines I share through the things that I share, but it's my duty to discipline myself. I don't know who may need to catch that. And according to the pledge that I made with myself, according to the oath that I took with myself, you know, my higher self, to integrate, to calibrate, to relate to self, and to elevate self on each and every level of the tree of life of oneself that each and every one of us got to do. I came to the conclusion, and in some cases, the hindsight. It's a hindsight. But I came to the conclusion that the hardest part of the climb is at the bottom. For some, the hardest part of your climb was at the bottom. And for some, the hardest part of your climb is gonna be getting started. Because in this era of wokeness, some woke people ain't never got started. Now y'all may say, what do I mean by that? It's a lot of woke people that ain't did no healing. So everybody woke ain't progressing to get better. We got woke people progressing to get worse. They're just aware of their bullshit. So it's a fine line. And when we the mediator, when we the mediator of what our fine line consists of, we have a better way of knowing how to navigate. But the hardest part of the climb is at the bottom. And the hardest part of the climb gonna be getting started. You hear me? But life situations don't change us. They have an effect, they have an impact, they have an impact, and they have an influence on whether or not we see a need to change ourselves. It's that simple. You hear me? So, discipline yourself to be so aware of yourself that you're aware of yourself. And navigate from that place. And then, this journey, as long as we have time to partake of it, on this side of life, it'll be a lot easier. It'll be a lot smoother. And it'll be a lot more peace. You hear me? At all times, you just gotta know your fine line. That's the aim, or at least it is for me. But in the conclusion, what you think? Tell me what you think. What about you? That's my take on it, but what about you? What you think? See, in my truth, I ain't got no excuses. So, this time that we have is very detrimental as well as beneficial to me. And I say detrimental because I ain't always using my time to the highest potential since the time that I've been here. So, it's beneficial now that I use all my time, not having no time to play, you hear me? Because it costs too much for us to get here. And once we here, it costs even more to stay. You don't listen, you're gonna miss it. But that's just my thoughts. What about you? What you think? Stillness in abundance, love and light, health and wholeness. Stillness in abundance, love and light, health and wholeness. Stillness in abundance, love and light, health and wholeness. You know. That concludes the message for the day. The emoji will be, put your scissors up, raw and uncut. You hear me? Keep it raw and uncut with yourself. Keep it real with yourself, trill with yourself, 10 toes down with yourself, 100 with yourself. And if you do it with yourself, I already know what you're gonna bring to the table with me. You hear me? I love y'all. Stillness in abundance, love and light, health and wholeness. Feel good for no reason at all. Tonight's emoji will be scissors. Put your scissors in the comment section once again, new subscribers. For the raffle at the end of the month, place your emoji in the comment section with your scissors. It's simple as that for your submission. You hear me? And once again, feel good for no reason at all. Feeling good is your source to your divinity. You hear me? I love y'all. My name is Sawu, with a piece of my mind.